Hello,
Hello.
Bob.
Contact with foreign with Earth. Here, what are you doing? Okay, very good. We've gotten together. There's got to be a song in there someplace. Okay. Okay, very good. Well, we were going crazy here, and I don't know if it was your end or my end, but that's okay.
I honestly think it was neither of our end. I think it was the Blog Talk Radio. It's all
It
their
was
fault.
God. The blog God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Okay, so what are we doing? Are we going to go on the air this week, or what's happening? Are we set?
We're live right now.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. For the folks that are listening, we have no idea what's going on this side. We had the electronic wizards are fooling with us or something. So now we're contacting. Let's go from there. We'll make like nothing ever happened and start over again.
Sounds good to me.
So hey, good evening. I'm just glad to be here.
Yes,
Excellent.
we're happy that you came on the show. And I was telling Jeff earlier that I was kind of glad that we did postpone that last time because of this new. I mean, not glad, you know what I mean, but just because it kind of turned out. I didn't mean it like that, but like because it's good because of this new stuff that they're finally telling us that there's some other planet or whatever. So. Yeah, so I guess we.
However, we got to be careful with that. But so,
agree.
how would you like to start this evening now that we made our telephone connection?
Do you think the new show X Files will mention Nibiru at all? I hope so.
I don't know. I don't.
Come on.
It depends.
How
I guess.
awesome would that be?
Well, eventually somebody's got to mention it. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Now, listen. Let me. I don't know how many of your listeners do or do not know who I am. I don't know whether I should give this kind of a little bit of an update, particularly for those who are saying, "Who is Bob Fletcher?" Anyhow.
Yes, please, yes.
Okay, and then we can kind of go on from there. And of course, for the people that are wondering what we're talking about, I had, of course, done actually a year ago released a DVD expose on the discovery of Planet X. But let me give those folks who don't know who I am, kind of give them a brief update because otherwise it would take a month on the air to do a real good on my background.
Sure.
So I have to pass over. Pretend you've already had 29 days of it on the air. But to put it in a shortened version, many years ago, back basically in about 1985, I had been in several businesses. I had been an executive in the music business with MCA Records, which is the biggest record company in the world, on up again and off again, but MCA being a gigantic record company. And I was a promotion director with the MCA during let's say in the 70s, and been in and out of several businesses. In the early 80s, I had briefly for about a year or so an international consulting company with one of my partners in that business, literally was the consulate general or the attaché in Washington, D.C. From the country of Liberia. And so we were doing international consulting and et cetera, and he was my partner, where you could actually call the embassy back at that time and contact me or leave a message directly through the embassy. So it was pretty good for business. There's nothing better than having on your business card the alternate phone number to my office was the embassy in Washington, D.C., which most countries would not do that. But in this case, he had been there for like 15 years, so he didn't care. There was nobody. The president, the seated president in Liberia was his boss, so he had fairly high up. But the reason I mention that is my next step was in my life was a toy company. I became a manufacturer of toys. I had a particular toy that I had invented that was rather unique, and I started making a few of them kind of as a hobby, and they became such a big deal that when the consulting company closed, we closed doors on that because there was an overthrow of that country of Liberia in approximately 1980, and when that happened, most of the people we had signed some $1 million contracts with were killed all in 1 week. So that's the way they do the change of presidency over there. So anyhow, I can look back at kind of on a humorous point at this point in time, but it's kind of terminated most of our contracts. So I went into the toy business, manufacturing toys, and which is as far away from political mainstream or political corruption as you could possibly be by manufacturing toys, and I had a couple of retail operations in amusement parks and things of that sort. And of course, had not up to that point been very politically oriented, because the average guy, which I put myself in that, well, maybe I'm never average, but pretty much in that category, I just was not. I didn't care what went on in Washington, because I always kind of assumed in reality it didn't have a real good connection to my personal life. It's like most of us. And so I was looking to expand the toy company. We were doing very well, and I wanted to go on television with the toy, because with that kind of a product, we would have sold, like 10 million of them in a couple of months on television. That's the kind of toy it was, a demonstration kind of a thing. So I ran across a company. A fellow had a company, actually had about 6 companies, and he had a lot of money. I met him in New York City in a marketing company, a marketing convention for miscellaneous products, a gigantic show, 35,000 participants in this particular marketing show, which is once a year in near Madison Square Garden. It's really a big thing. So I ran into this fella, and he jotted down on his business card, and he handed it to me, and he just said, "I'm interested in a large number of toys that you manufacture. Contact me when you get back to Atlanta." So I just took the card and put it aside, because when you're doing those shows, you get 1,000 people like that just come by and say, "Call me when get back, and I'll buy $1 million worth of junk from you." So the bottom line, to cut to the chase, as they say, this gentleman, using that term in the wrong definition, but this jerk was in fact a supplier of covert weapons for the United States Central Intelligence and National Security Agency. He and his business partners, who were the major generals that had run the entire Vietnam War, and that's who this guy was. He was a covert arms supplier, and I ended up merging with him, not knowing that, of course. That was not part of my deal. I didn't know anything about that crazy stuff, and I became plopped and dropped right into the middle of James Bond kind of a situation, where this guy wanted me to use my toy company as a covert front to travel in and out of a variety of nations, different countries, where the Central Intelligence and the National Security Agencies were doing wars. And at that time, it was the Iran-Contra war situation down in Nicaragua, and they were moving into West Africa. See, and that's where that company that I had with the Liberian and contracts with Liberia, that's how that came into play, because somehow apparently he had found out about that, and his offices were right next door to my offices in Atlanta. So how that came about exactly, I never found out, but that was the bottom line, was that he came and finally said, when I asked him, because I was meeting major generals, these big, very heavy-duty 4-star generals, coming in and out of my toy company, which is a little unique, and these people were speaking in foreign languages, and they were selling, supplying the Hellfire missiles out of my toy factory in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, I don't mean that we never physically had missiles on the floor in the toy company, but nonetheless, the operations, the meetings, and the sales, and all of that, the agreements and contracts were all going through the company right there. Oh, wow. So it's kind of mind-boggling. And again, it's a wonderful story, the whole story of that, and how I ended up getting into chasing corrupted people in government. That was the root of the entire thing. Because what happened was, of course, I had already contracted with him. I merged my company, moved it in under his roof, and then a few months later was when I found out the bottom line of what was going on. And of course, he wanted me, he said, get your passport in order, because in a week or two, I want you to get out of here. You've got to go to, I think it was Angola, on another, West African nation, and to put together some contractual agreements and stuff like that. So, and of course, I said, he said, you'll make more money than the president. He said, and you never have to pay taxes again, or any of that stuff. We just don't bother with it, and so of course, I just said, no, I'm not going to do that. I said, I'm going to get killed if I do that. What? This is crazy. What are you talking about? I'm not Central Intelligence Agents. I'd never even been anything in that category, close to it. I wouldn't know what I was doing. I guess I could do it. It's just functioning as an informational courier between the United States government, these guys, and by the way, these people were. When I confronted him and I said, "What is it that's going on here?" I said, "What's with the military guys and the generals and the telephone calls of foreign languages and faxes coming in?" At that time, that we didn't have email. It was just a fax machine. We had coded messages coming in about the delivery of potatoes and things of that sort, which were actually weapons and not potatoes, but I didn't know anything about that kind of stuff.
Right.
So I backed off, and then when I started pursuing, I had a good friend who had been a lawyer for many years, had been a family friend, and I got with her right away, and I said, "Hey, you know that great deal that I got into a couple months ago?" I said, "It's not so great," and I said, "I need to get some money back. They took my whole company. I mean, I had this, $1 million company that was now gone. So I was making 50,000, whatever it was, coming through our just the toy stores in the Six Flags amusement park. So the bottom line was, when we started moving forward with the potential of doing a simple legal action, a fraudulent contract, and they had plenty of money. They should have just paid me my money back and been done with it. But instead, they told me to take a hike, and they said, basically, this fella, and his name was Gary Best, he put his hand into his pocket wearing his dress suit, suit jacket on, put his hand into his pocket, pulled it back out in the shape of with his fingers in the shape of a gun, aimed it towards my forehead and said if I talked to anybody and went any farther with this, and then he just made like he was pulling the trigger and said bang. So these guys were who they were. They had run Air America. If you ever saw the movie that was done, it was so popular, called Air America, about the drug smuggling out of Vietnam. These guys ran it. They were Air America. Okay, that's who they were.
Wow.
They were assassins. They had done all of the assassinations during the Vietnam War. The shipment involved coming out of with the drugs coming out of Vietnam. They were actually putting them in the carcasses of our dead soldiers, opening them up and smuggling the drug in their bodies.
Damn.
That's how low life these people were. And it was only within a month or two of my exiting that guy and telling him, "Hey, I'm not going to have anything to do with this," that they started doing the peripheral investigation that became the Iran-Contra inquiries at the Senate and the Congress. And this was 1987. I was involved in 85, 86, around that period of time. So when I saw that, I was very angry because I had lost my whole business. I lost all, everything, and was unable to go anyplace. Because when we started moving forward legally, I received notification that my toy factory was classified secret. And those people involved with myself, of course, are referring to their own people, these operatives, that those people were all classified as being secret. We couldn't go to court, and the judges, the courts would not hear it because it was all classified. So I was really angry. That was about, let's say a year or so after finding out I had just lost everything, and there was no recourse. When I saw they were investigating the Iran-Contra business, I contacted, as a matter of fact, it was Senator John Kerry, who's now, of course, the Secretary of State presently, contacted him because he was headed one of the major inquiries at that time. And I simply said, "I'm going to give you a couple of names on the telephone. If, in fact, these people are who I think they are, you tell me, and we'll go from there. And if it doesn't mean anything to you, then we'll just forget about it." And I, of course, told him the people that were involved, and he said, "You're right in the middle of it. Can you come to Washington?" So I did, went on up to Washington with my lawyer friend, and that started it, 1987. It started myself. I became an interviewed witness in the Iran-Contra inquiries, and when that happened, from that point forward, I had senators and congressmen all over me because they were everybody had an investigation they wanted to do. An awful lot of it was connections of drug operations directly into the White House, and drug operations into national security and the CIA and all of that. So all of those guys, they have their own little agenda to pursue who they would like to. And so they were coming to me saying, Mr. Fletcher, do you know anything about this thing over here? Or did this fellow's name ever come up over here, involved with this over here? And next thing I realized, I was in the middle of chasing corrupted people in government, and now it's been 30 years. So now and ended up being an awful. It's just so many, and it was a wonderful experience, mind-boggling. I mean, it's stressful, obviously, because what I discovered is that the corruption in our government, from the president down, including senators and congressmen and everyone else, for the most part, almost all of them are corrupted in one manner or another. And it's either a mild kind of a thing, a small level, or it's really pretty serious. And so in the last 30 years, I've been directly involved with probably 7 or 8 major investigations at the congressional and Senate level. And one of the biggest ones that never quite got off the ground was investigations that I was doing for and with Congressman Sonny Bono.
Mm-hmm.
And 15 days before that inquiry was going to actually open up on the floor of the United States Congress with Sonny, they murdered him. He was murdered on the ski slopes.
Yep.
They told everybody he ran into a tree.
Yep.
And everybody got a nice little giggle about how stupid he was to run into a tree. And he was dead, and that was the end of it. And we never got to get that off the ground. That would have impeached president and vice president at that time. It would have put people in prison. It was an amazingly heavy-duty inquiry connecting drug smuggling and murder and assassinations right up into the highest level of our security in the United States government, period.
Wow.
I had received I had supplied them with enough information myself personally, documentation, and even recorded statements of drug operatives and all of that. I had supplied all that to Sonny over a period of about 8-9 months. And in December of, trying to get the right date, but I think it was, let's see, what would it have been? 90. Okay, so it would have been 97, December of 97. Most of the year of 97, I was doing that, supplying that information to Sonny. And in December, about the 10th of December, they called me. I was living in Los Angeles at the time. They called and they said, the committee it's all done. It's ready. We're going to have subpoena powers to carry out this investigation and on the floor of the Congress. Can you plan in January to get into Washington? And we actually going to have subpoena powers. And that's very unusual. They don't usually have subpoena powers with congressional and senatorial inquiries because an awful lot of people would be in prison if they did that. Because the reality is the Senate and the Congress in their inquiries are completely fraudulent. You could say 99% of it. Completely bogus, fraudulent junk. They do it to feed the public the concept or the idea that they're trying to do something and make things better and arrest people, and it never happens. It's all junk, including every major inquiry that I've ever seen in the last 30 years. They even had specific senators and congressmen and lawyers that they would bring in specifically to help or assist or oversight. Usually they would call on the chairman of the inquiry, and it was 2 or 3 particular guys that were completely fraudulent, and they were brought in just to shut them down and to dance around in circles instead of doing anything serious. So December, middle of the month of December, they called. I said yes, and I was elated. I was so glad. We were going to knock some people's brains out with a serious investigation. Sonny was completely livid as to the amount of corruption that he had seen once he became a congressman. He couldn't believe it. Couldn't even sleep at night. It made him crazy. For people that don't remember, during the inquiry for the Waco church that burned back, it was burned down by the government. Yep. Sonny was on that committee and literally physically broke into tears when he heard the testimony about how we killed the children coming out of the church, set it on fire, and when they ran out, they were shooting them. You know, and he found out all of this material. He literally broke into tears on the floor of the Congress. He couldn't handle it. But that's where his head was. They couldn't buy him off, couldn't shut him up. So the alternate, therefore, was to kill him before that committee opened up. They went on their break on about the 15th of December. 10 days after the telephone call to myself in Los Angeles, Sonny was murdered, pistol whipped to death on the top of the
wow.
And I did do an investigation on that separately, which is in a DVD if anybody's interested, a complete coverage of my investigation on that, including his autopsy and all the rest of that. There's absolutely no question that he was murdered.
I believe
it took us 2 years almost to get the autopsy, and I was working for Sonny's mother, actually working for Sonny's mother and her attorney in Los Angeles, and she couldn't get it. That's how corrupted this thing was.
Wow.
And so we did finally get it. It didn't, and then of course I was unable to go anyplace. I wanted to have it reopened, but I got, and there's a lot of reasons why. Primarily, is the people that had the best information. All of them benefited from his death in terms of financial or something. So, end of story. So now it brings us up to where we are a couple of years ago. Again, I have about 10 DVD reports that are available to the general public, and they can get them if they're interested at my website, BobFletcherInvestigations.com. They're all investigations that I was directly involved with. They're not reporter. I'm not a reporter doing things of other people's miscellaneous hand-me-down stories. They're all my own personal experiences, and they're all pretty good. It's includes material and documentation that other people never had. I had in my possession back in the 80s, I was able to secure Oliver North's all of the notebooks and all of the transcriptions, not only out of his computer, but out of his front vest pocket. I had his own notebooks, actually, where this Oliver North, by the way, for the younger folks, he was the primary character in the middle of the Iran-Contra arms deal and the drug operations in and out, swapping drugs for weapons with the CIA and with those characters that were in my toy factory. They literally used to fly planes, U.S. military planes, loaded with illegal arms and deliver them to the Contras, the revolutionaries, and then swap out $10 million worth of cocaine loaded on the airplanes, fly them back, and offload them at our Air Force bases. So that's how directly involved everybody, which included Bush and Reagan. Reagan, I don't know if he knew. I don't know whether Reagan knew a lot of. I don't know. I'm not sure, but he was the kind of guy that of course, Reagan and Bush was his vice president, and then he became president and continued, and then his son became president and he continued it. They used their oil rigs for delivery points for the narcotics and all of that.
Yeah, I've heard that.
But I literally had all of the documents that were sufficient unto themselves to impeach the whole bunch of them, put them in prison. And unknown to most people, Oliver North, who stood so proudly with his hand raised and then lied to the Senate and the Congress during the investigations, and then later admitted that he did, I had his personal handwritten notes that said, pick up a supply an airplane to pick up 1,500 kilos of MASH in his own handwriting out of his vest pocket. I have all of his computer material that the letters and internal communications to the president, the vice president, and everybody else relative to the arms and to the drugs, etc. I supplied that to the Senate or to the United States Congress at the time of the inquiry. I had chief legal counsel of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. When I sat in front of him and hand-delivered 155 pages of this stuff, I thought he was going to fall off his chair because they had never even seen it. These were the guys that literally ran the inquiry in Washington and had never even seen what the toy manufacturer delivered to them in their face back in the 80s. So 2 years ago or something, somebody came to me and said, Bob, there's a huge amount of money vanishing out of all sorts of budgets, big money, and if you could kind of look into it, can you look into it, try to figure out what's going on with this? And this had happened many times over the last 30 years now, where people would come or somebody would call or come by the office or whatever and drop off a little envelope with some information, and he would say, hey, we're going to look into this. Do you have anything that connects to this thing? Being involved with it for so many years. And so I said, well, sure, I'll look into it. I'm kind of I'm getting old at this point in time. Now I'm 75. And so at this time, I'm kind of been away from it. An awful lot of the people that were some of my best insiders are dead now, and half of them are natural deaths, and the other half expedited Central Intelligence operations to terminate them. But I said, sure, what are we talking about? And they said, billions of dollars. And, I said, billions? And then they said, well, even trillions of dollars. And I said, well, wait a minute, you can't even you can't money launder $1 trillion. How do you do that? I mean, I was used to, and some of those people that I'm talking about, we're used to chasing down something where some congressman's doing got advanced stock information and ripped something, or maybe it's $1 million because they wanted a new house in Tahiti or something. And so that was a typical thing that we were used to looking into. But I said, wow, what are we talking about? So I got the necessary basic information to start looking into it. And this is like 2.5 years ago now. And one thing led to another. And the bottom line, I found out to my surprise and literally shocked to find out that there were $1 trillion at a time vanishing from the budgets. And you have to get a handle on this. We have a handful of budgets. Or you had the legitimate budgeting for government operations, which are supposedly agreed upon by the Congress and the Senate. They never read that stuff. Sometimes you're talking about a 4,000-page budgeting layout for, so any time a congressman said, I went over all of it, went before I voted, that's baloney. I mean, it's almost, it's laughable, and it is ridiculous.
It is.
They say, oh, we carefully went over it, get out of here. That's a joke. So, but you have the budget that theoretically is there year in and year out, and they vote on it and change it and update it and all that, and usually try to put little things into it where they ripped off a couple million to go into their district so they can get elected again next year to build a library for blind people or something like that. Some of the projects that they do are absolutely ridiculous, like investigating why rats and mice can't see good on a foggy afternoon or something like that. You can't imagine the money that goes into different districts under a congressional person's name or a senator's name in their area for stupid, moronic, unbelievable things. $1 million here, $2 million there, $3 million there. And then if you look closely at it, you'll find out his cousin is a guy that's running some company someplace, and he needed a $10 million financial assistance, and that's what it amounts to being. Stuff like that. All right, well, that's not a big deal. But what was going on was they had black budgets that are interesting. Yeah, well, what's interesting is, first you have regular standard budgets, okay, and they steal out of that. That's pretty easy. Then they have black budgets that, in the most case, a lot of congressmen and senators are not cleared for secret at all, or top secret, that's for sure. They're just not cleared to even see it, so they don't even know what they're saying okay to. And they have these carte blanche things like $2 billion for a particular aircraft development program, and they don't even know what it is, but they sign off because otherwise, they're going to make somebody angry, so they don't do it. They'll just go ahead and sign off on these. And we have to remember, too, that what I just said, that is that the senators and congressmen, very few of them are at the top secret cleared level, period. End of story. So that they don't know, an awful lot of them do not even know what I know, and that's only because I had people for so many years that would tell me, they not supposed to, but they did, and told me about things, and so I actually knew more and had more information than many of the senators and congressmen. Then they have budgets that are not just secret, but then they have the top secret, and then they have above top secret, and so you have this giant amount of money that nobody knows anything about going someplace, and that's on a regular basis. So what I found out when I
building something.
Yeah, well, yeah. So when I got into looking into it, and which became the center of the investigation that I just completed a year ago, finalized it, and released a DVD, made it available to the general public, and it is that in 1983, some point in time there, when Ronald Reagan was president and George Bush was actually president, but was pretending he was vice president. He and his administration, they came in and they said, we got some really bad news. The rumor of Planet X, which had been banged around for 50 years, I mean, been written up in stories and books and movies and all kinds of stuff about this planet called Planet X, Nibiru, whatever you wanted to call it.
Zachariah Sitchin.
Zachariah Sitchin had an awful lot to do with it. He wrote several books talking about his deciphering thousands of clay tablets. As a matter of fact, there was like 22,000 of these. They were discovered in the Syrian area, where they literally had written and inscribed like books, if you will, and he was one of the few people that was able to decipher it. And when he did, he found out the story of this planet that comes around from the far reaches of our solar system, comes back around. He thought, and he claimed, that it was a 3,500 year cycle, an orbit, of a cycle of 3,500 years. Now, there's a big dispute about that between people that have been studying this for their lifetime. I was not into it for my lifetime, but and there is a push and a pull between groups that it may actually be 350 and not 3,500.
Right, I've heard that too. Yep.
Right, and the point of that is, and by the way, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but for the people that don't know anything I'm talking about,
I love to hear the chronicles.
so this planet, anyhow, comes around in a huge orbit. It's similar to Halley's Comet. Halley's Comet, which everybody knows about, comes around every 75 years. Now that you can set your calendar and give or take a day or two, 75 years, Halley's Comet will be back around again. And it comes around, goes around the sun, and circles back off into again, in that case, it's a 75-year orbit. And this one, the Nibiru Planet X, had been written up to being and analyzed and calculated, et cetera, by many people, to be on a 3,500. Now, it may be a 350 year, all right? And if it was a 350 year, that meant physically that it would have actually passed around the sun and back out 10 times during a 3,500 year period. So, and since 350 years ago, right now, we still, we don't have real good records. There were no films or news reporters. Well, that's maybe a good thing. But either one of them could be right, is what I'm saying. And the idea was that a 3,500 year, it's just a matter of adding a zero during translations. So if you're doing translation with information from antiquity, of ancient history, going back to the time of the Bible even, the point is that they did not use zeros. The manner by writing it down would have been something like 10-fold less 60 or something of that sort. They weren't using zeros in their regular writing down of numbers. So this very easily can be an error of whether it's 3,000 or it's 300. That's so you understand where that came from.
They call that a shar, right? Every 3,600 or 3,500 years is a shar. But here's the point. It could have been coming every 350, and we don't have any better reason to know that that's negative or positive. All right, so we don't know which one's right. From the 12th planet, it's 3,500, and I liked how Zachariah Sitchin, he said that life on another planet would be timed to that planet. So the life that was living there, 3,500 years for us would be 1 year to them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, see, and that's a different thing too. I mean, so yeah, that's another whole separate thing. But it can actually simply be the fact that during the period of time that he was writing about, the zero was not a simple circular figure on numbers. And that it wasn't brought in, I don't think, until the time of the Roman Empire or something in that period of time. You see, when they started using zeros. And so the mistake is very easy. So we'll move past that. The bottom line for us, and let me get back to Reagan Bush. What happened in '83 was the first time they had one good, real big signaling telescope that was sent out to outer space. And when they sent it out, they came back and they said, uh-oh, it looks like this thing is there. And if it's coming back, they're doing the calculations, and they said, this thing's going to be in another 20, 30 years. All right? This was 1983. All right? So anyhow, they did the calculations, et cetera, and they said, we are in serious jeopardy. Because if this is going to do what all the old studies, including the Bible and a multitude of scriptural writings, including the ancient Chinese and the ancient Tibetans, the monks on the hills in the top of Tibet, and all these cave writings on the walls and all the rest of the stuff that people have studied for so many years, and a couple of people have done a great job, like Mr. Gil Broussard had done a tremendous amount of studies on this, and even went to China, was living in China for a while, studying the Chinese writings out of the libraries and things of that sort, where they actually, 1,000 years ago or sometime, it was written down, in black and white, the entire travels of this thing coming into the sky and flying across, and they called it a flaming red dragon that passed this over the nation of China and all that. So they had all these writings, and it's in the Bible like crazy, and it's called the wormwood, and et cetera. It's in the biblical revelations, describes exactly the events that were described when this came around back in biblical times. So, it's not, it used to be joked about because nobody could see it. And then, of course, the realization is that it's an infrared planet. It's something that you can't see. It doesn't put out its own light, so we won't see it until it gets coming in close enough to pick up our own sunlight. Once it does, then you will see it. But what I discovered from doing, again, my investigations, and I was, the idea. And again, I was looking for the money. Remember that, okay? I was looking for, where does the big money go? What was it that all of a sudden in the 80s changed all kinds of budgets? It changed what we were doing with our outer space NASA projects. It changed. They started talking about doing that Star Wars. Remember the Star Wars thing with Reagan, and it was going to set up this ability to put satellites out all over, and they could pick up the launching of missiles coming towards us, and we'd be able to find them and shoot them down real quick and all that, and how great that would be. Except I found out that most of those telescopic things they put out, they were aimed out to outer space. They weren't being aimed at Russia and China. I mean, they had some of them, of course, but the reality were that they were snooping and watching things going in outer space. Then I found out that the Vatican came a few years back and cut a deal with the government here, and in Arizona they built a huge infrared telescope, and that's in Arizona. And by the way, it's called Lucifer. I don't know. That's kind of strange for the Pope. Yeah. The Pope named it Lucifer. I thought that was a little weird, but he did. So I started looking, and I asked around a few directions with people that had contacts and also had some extraordinary brain cells. And, I said, what is it that happened in that period of time that made all these things change? They started doing crazy stuff. They built this giant underground facility underneath the Denver airport. They had that project there, and they started building this. They got 5 times as much underground than they have on the top of the airport up there. I went in within a week of the opening in 95, when they opened the Denver airport. I snuck in and went underground, and that is one heck of a giant facility underground.
I've heard.
Okay, and they talked about it, but I've been there, done that, and I've seen it.
No kidding. Wow.
That's the end of that dispute. But and I had also received during the 90s that I had just kind of put let's say on the back shelf, but I had seen films, videos, and photographs, stills, and what have you. I was, again, just a little bit before we had real good digital stuff, and they had truck drivers that had gone underground at one facility and driven 800 miles and came up at another location underground. I didn't know whether to quite believe that or not back then, and I was doing other things at that time. Like I say, I actually was doing things like for Sonny during that kind of time frame. So I didn't get into making a big deal, but I kept it. I kept the pictures, I kept films, and I kept their stories. I had all of that in files, and somebody came to me 2.5 years ago, I guess, try to give a time date on this, and said, whatever it is that's bothering them, bothering the crooks out of government, instead of just stealing a few million for their next summer vacation home, the money's disappearing. But have you realized about do you know about all the underground facilities? And it was a military guy that had seen some of them. And I said, well, I was kind of like, I was aware of it, but I don't, are you talking a lot, or what do you, because I didn't think there was that big of a deal, because in reality, before 83, there wasn't. There was a few of them, underground, and most of them were legitimate, like the NORAD facilities for keeping track of missiles and possible invasions and what have you. So I said, okay, is there really big numbers of these, or what are we talking about? And so he handed me information relative to the bottom line is we have built 103 of these in the United States. There's that many of them underground. They literally are gigantic hideout survival facilities for the elite upper crust of the United States of America. We're talking locations that can hold 10,000 people. We're talking locations that have high-speed monorail maglev trains that go 400 miles an hour underground, and they go from one location to another. I have live footage of a few of the facilities that had been handed off to me that shows 18-wheelers side by side and passing at intersections under the ground in these locations. They have some of the facilities have extra amount of capability of growing foods underground, complete vegetation growth of necessities. They had, then I found out, I have paperwork related to it, I found out that in fact they had been for the last 5 years buying freeze-dried foods and survival foods by the millions and millions and putting them into the underground facilities. And with a time frame to have most of it done by 2012, 2014, the delivery of the foods. We actually have FEMA paperwork that shows their inquiry with some of the bigger companies and asking them how many tons of this food or that food could be supplied in a short period of time upon request, et cetera, et cetera. For the last 5 years, there has been a shortage of survival foods to go into the regular retail outlets above ground for the public consumers. They have had a shortage. The big companies have not even been able to get the orders that they wanted, such as Walmart, not being able to get as much to sell to their people in their stores because the government had taken all of the advanced contract for delivery on the freeze-dried survival foods. So that's what they had been, where all the money had been disappearing. And Donald Rumsfeld, who was the head of the Defense Department, sat down in front of one of the congressional inquiries that I'm referring to back. As a matter of fact, this was in 2001. 2001. He sat before the Congress on an inquiry on disappearance of some monies, and he said the Defense Department in the last few years has been unable to account for $2.3 trillion. And he told the United States Congress about that. All right? When he told it to them was the day before the 9/11 Twin Towers attack on the World Trade Center.
Wow.
The day before. Now, what also happened, all of the paperwork that would have supported that information was destroyed on that day because of the explosion that took place at the Pentagon. You still have me? I'm picking up Mars.
Is that your fan, Jeff? Anyway.
Okay. Anyhow, so as long as we're still going. So the bottom line was, here's Donald Rumsfeld, the head of the Defense Department, admitting, of course, he's part of the program. He's a bad guy. He's a bandit, and that's the end of the story. Absolutely. I mean, I can go into stuff that people don't know about him and have your hair fall out. Now, so you had $2.3 trillion with a T, folks, disappeared. Then we had the lady that was in charge of overseeing the Federal Reserve. Theoretically, she's supposedly the auditor, so to speak, or part of that thing. There is no such thing as an audit of the Federal Reserve because the Senate and the Congress are not permitted to look or even ask for it. So when some senators and congressmen had requested to do an audit to find out from the Federal Reserve if, in fact, there is any gold still in Fort Knox, he was told by the Federal Reserve to go away and stop bothering them because they are not part of the U.S. government. It's an the Federal Reserve is a gathering of banks, an association of banks with a couple of people at the head, and the Congress and the Senate are not legally allowed to require an audit of the Federal Reserve ever. Okay? And that's legitimate. That's the way they set it up. And the Federal Reserve, for example, Ron Paul, who came forward a couple years ago, 2008, wanted to have an audit on the gold. They told him to go away, get out of his office, and don't bother him. End of story. So the Senate and the Congress cannot get an audit of the Federal Reserve. All of the gold formerly in Fort Knox is now gone. The bulk of it, probably, and I can't give a good percentage, but it's either like half of it has been put into creating these hideout underground facilities, and the other half is still in bullion cubes in hidden away in one or two of the underground facilities. The gold is gone. When Germany and a couple of other countries in 2008 came forward because they needed their gold. See, many foreign nations, almost every one.
I remember that. Yeah.
All right, and what happens? Every major foreign nation has tons of gold in Fort Knox on reserve, held for security in our Fort Knox, considered to be the safest compared to having it in Berlin someplace where they might have, not as secure. All right. So an example, Germany has 1,500 tons of gold.
Oh, shit.
That's right. 1,500 tons of gold in the federal Fort Knox system. When they asked for it, they were told to come back in 6 years.
Yeah.
Now, what they ended up doing, because it started making a lot of ripples in the water, all right, what they ended up doing, they did give them, I guess, a couple of tons of it or something, but they didn't get all of it. And they didn't get a good, accurate audit. Nobody gets an audit. They just say, go away. And literally, it's a mind-boggling. It's nobody ever realized or paid attention to it. Ron Paul didn't, and Ron Paul didn't know. He went in there, and he said, the Senate and the Congress has to have an audit. They said, get out of here. They said, look at the way the mandate is written up. When we created the Federal Reserve, look at the paperwork. And he did.
Right,
and they were right. So end of story. So what do we have? We have trillions and billions over the last 20 years been slithering out the back door someplace. There's so much, it's mind-boggling. Something like in the Federal Reserve, by the way, who spins money off to foreign banks and gold off to foreign banks to kind of stabilize the world money situation. That is part of what they do. Of course, whether it's done legally or not, we have no idea because they don't do an audit. Okay, but the bottom line was this lady who I started to mention a few minutes ago was at the auditing position, so to speak. She came forward to the Senate and the Congress and answering questions, and one of the congressmen said, we understand that there's $9 trillion that you don't know where it is. Is that true?
Right.
And
she sat, and I had this in, on film. She literally sat there and kind of said, well, we're just not sure exactly where it went. That is a right figure. It was like 9.2 or something trillion. She says it's going to foreign banks, but I couldn't tell you right now which banks have it. Okay, so there's another 9 trillion. All right, so just in not counting the gold, for crying out loud. And by the way, if you do the mathematics at $1,400 an ounce, and the amount of tonnage in terms of the gold is the numbers of value is really obviously becomes so much. You run out of ink with the zeros. It's really a tremendous amount of money going.